The obelisk stayed silent for centuries, until the human touched it the planet lay abandoned, its once vibrant surface now reduced to a barren wasteland. A thick purple haze covered the horizon, and the air was heavy with silence. Once home to an ancient and advanced race, the world had long since fallen into ruin. Yet, standing in the middle of this ghostly landscape was something that seemed out of place, as if it had resisted the ravages of time. Towering above everything else, an enormous obelisk pierced the sky, its jagged stone surface covered in alien symbols. For centuries, it had remained untouched, unremarkable to all who passed by. There were those who believed it was simply a relic of an extinct civilization, a forgotten relic from a time long gone. Others, especially the more superstitious among the galactic explorers, believed it was a trap, a dangerous artifact that no one should touch, lest they provoke the wrath of whatever ancient race had once used it. But no one truly knew its origins, and fewer still dared to investigate. That was until Captain Elijah Quinn arrived. Elijah had heard the stories. He knew of the obelisk's existence, of course. Who hadn't? But he had always dismissed it as a myth, a rumor, just another mystery like so many others in the galaxy. He'd encountered his fair share of strange artifacts and forgotten relics, each with its own mysteries, but none had ever been as intriguing as this one. The distress signal he had received from the planet had been faint, almost like an echo, but it was enough to pull him in. Something about it had felt familiar. Perhaps it was just his curiosity as an explorer, or maybe it was something deeper, something instinctual, as if he was being called. Either way, he couldn't resist. The crew of his ship, the Endeavor, had been hesitant. They were explorers, sure, but the planet was in a remote part of the galaxy, and no one had come here in decades. The dangers of exploring unknown worlds were real, and no one wanted to end up like the countless other ships that had vanished in the same region. But Elijah was determined. He had faced danger before and emerged unscathed. He wasn't about to let fear stop him from uncovering something that might change the course of history. As the Endeavor landed on the planet's surface, the crew prepared to disembark. The air outside was dry and stale, the ground cracked and broken, as if the planet had once been teeming with life but had since withered away. They donned their environmental suits, the hissing sound of their air tanks the only noise in the otherwise eerie silence. Elijah stood at the airlock, staring at the massive obelisk in the distance. The sight was both awe-inspiring and unsettling. It stood tall and proud, its sharp edges like the fingers of a giant, reaching for the sky. The symbols carved into its surface were intricate, almost too perfect for something that had been left untouched for centuries. They looked like a language, one that no one had been able to decode. They seemed to glow faintly, as though they held some kind of latent energy within them. "Are we sure about this, Captain?" his second-in-command, Lieutenant Zara, asked. She was a practical woman, always cautious, and her wariness was evident in her voice. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." Elijah glanced back at her, offering a reassuring smile. "I've seen worse. We're explorers, Zara. This is what we do. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." Zara didn't seem convinced, but she nodded, accepting his words with a reluctant sigh. They set out across the cracked plains, making their way toward the obelisk. The air felt thick with tension, and the strange feeling that had been gnawing at Elijah grew stronger the closer they got. It wasn't fear, exactly, more like a deep sense of curiosity, mixed with an odd sense of familiarity. He felt as though he had been here before, though he knew that couldn't be true. As they neared the obelisk, Elijah could see the fine details that were otherwise hidden from a distance. The stone was darker than anything he had ever seen, almost black in some places, with veins of silver running through it. The symbols on the surface were like nothing he had encountered in all his years of exploration. They didn't resemble any known language, alien or human. They were more like patterns, an abstract form of communication, perhaps, or a code waiting to be cracked. The crew set up a perimeter around the obelisk, scanning it with their equipment. But no matter what they tried, the device refused to yield any information. No readings came back from the obelisk itself. It was as if it were completely cut off from the rest of the planet. "We're not getting anything," Zara said, her voice filled with frustration. "Not a single signal. It's like it's dead." Elijah didn't respond right away. His eyes were fixed on the obelisk, a strange pull drawing him closer. The others seemed to notice and exchanged glances, but none of them spoke up. Elijah felt a shiver run down his spine, but it wasn't out of fear. It was something else, something deeper. He took a few more steps forward, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold surface of the obelisk. The moment his skin made contact with the stone, a low hum resonated through the ground, and the air around him seemed to shimmer. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but then it grew louder, the hum deepening into a vibrating energy that seemed to pulse with life. The crew jumped back, startled by the sudden change. "Captain," Zara called out, her voice urgent. "What's happening?" Elijah didn't answer. His hand remained on the obelisk, and he could feel something inside of him shift. The sensation was overwhelming, as if the obelisk were alive, alive in a way that nothing he had ever encountered was. It wasn't just an ancient artifact. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was reaching out to him. He closed his eyes, allowing the strange energy to wash over him. In that moment, he saw flashes, visions of ancient cities, of alien beings with long, delicate limbs, of stars and galaxies he had never seen before. It was as though the obelisk was showing him the history of the galaxy itself. And in the midst of these visions, Elijah saw something else, a hand reaching toward him as though offering a connection. The hand was pale, smooth, and strangely familiar. The visions faded as quickly as they had come, and Elijah staggered back, gasping for breath. His head was spinning, and his heart was racing. He had no idea what just happened, but he knew one thing for certain: the obelisk had just awakened. What? "What was that?" Zara asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Elijah replied, his voice distant, "but I think it's just the beginning." The rest of the crew gathered around him, their faces filled with concern. Elijah looked up at the obelisk, which now seemed to glow faintly, as if it were alive and waiting. The silence that had once hung in the air was now thick with anticipation. Something had changed, and whatever it was far from over. The obelisk had stayed silent for centuries, but now it was calling out. The days that followed the captain's contact with the obelisk were nothing short of strange. The crew of the Endeavor couldn't shake the unease that hung in the air, a tension that felt as if the very planet was holding its breath. Elijah, despite his calm demeanor, felt something inside him shifting. The brief moment of connection with the obelisk had left him unsettled. It wasn't just the visions, the deep, cryptic images of distant worlds and alien figures that had filled his mind. No, it was something far more profound. The obelisk had awakened, yes, but what did that mean? And why had it chosen him? The crew continued to study the structure, but every scan, every attempt to decode the symbols etched into the stone, returned no results. The readings were off the charts, but there was no logical explanation. It was as though the obelisk was rejecting all modern technology, as if it were a sentient being itself, aware of the crew's presence but unwilling to communicate. For 3 days, they tried to make sense of the mysterious object. Elijah spent most of his time staring at the obelisk, trying to understand what it was trying to tell him. His hands itched to touch it again, but he resisted the urge. Something told him that doing so might have consequences, consequences that even his vast experience as an explorer might not prepare him for. On the 4th day, as the sun began to set on the desolate planet, Elijah stood once more before the obelisk, his eyes tracing the glowing symbols that covered its surface. It had been silent all this time, and yet the feeling that it was watching him never left. It was as if the obelisk knew he was there, waiting for something. He wasn't alone. Zara, his second-in-command, stood beside him, her face thoughtful as she studied the obelisk's surface. Her expression was one of caution, but there was something in her eyes that told Elijah she, too, felt the strange pull he had. "Elijah," Zara spoke quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't like this. The longer we stay here, the more wrong it feels. The atmosphere's changed since we first arrived. It's like something is waking up." Elijah glanced at her, a faint smile on his lips. "I feel it too," he admitted. "But we need to understand it, Zara. We can't just leave. This is history, something that could change everything we know about the universe. We're on the edge of something huge. I can feel it." Zara didn't respond right away. She looked around, her eyes narrowing. "Maybe we are. But I've been through enough to know that sometimes what you're looking for isn't always what you find, and sometimes it's better not to find it at all." Elijah took a deep breath, sensing the concern in her voice. She was right to be wary. Everything about this planet screamed danger, from the desolation to the eerie silence that had enveloped the world for centuries. But Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled onto something far greater than they realized. This was bigger than just an ancient artifact. The obelisk was part of something much larger, something that could unravel the mysteries of the galaxy itself. Maybe, Elijah replied, his tone soft but determined. But we won't know unless we try. Zara didn't say anything more. She knew he was right, even if it didn't sit well with her. She respected Elijah's drive, even if it often pushed them to take risks others would shy away from. He was fearless, a true explorer at heart. But there was always the nagging thought in the back of her mind. Was this curiosity worth the cost? Elijah stepped forward, his hand reaching out to touch the obelisk once more. As his fingers brushed against its surface, the hum returned, deeper now, as if the obelisk recognized him. This time the sensation was more intense, a surge of energy that coursed through his veins. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming, like his very cells were being rewritten, his mind expanding and contracting in waves. He closed his eyes, trying to ground himself, but the visions returned, this time even more vivid than before. He saw cities, impossibly advanced and glowing with light, stretching across vast landscapes. Alien creatures, tall and graceful, moved through the streets, their skin shimmering in the light of distant suns. He saw ships that could bend space itself, traveling faster than light, carrying entire civilizations across the galaxy. But then the vision shifted. A planet exploded, its core ripped apart in an instant. The cities crumbled, the ships fell from the sky, and the once thriving world was reduced to ashes. He saw the aliens, those tall, graceful beings, their faces filled with horror as they watched their world burn. And in the center of it all, the obelisk stood, unchanged, unmoved by the destruction around it. It was as if it had been the cause, or perhaps the only survivor of the catastrophe. Elijah snapped back to reality, gasping for air. His heart was racing, his hands trembling. He stumbled back, his mind reeling from the intensity of what he had seen. "Elijah," Zara exclaimed, rushing to his side. "Are you okay?" He looked up at her, his eyes wide. "I saw it," he said, his voice strained. "I saw what happened to them. They created the obelisk. It was their legacy, their hope for unity, but it destroyed them." Zara frowned, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "What are you talking about? Who are they? What happened?" Elijah struggled to steady his breath, his mind still reeling from the images. "The race that built this," he explained, pointing back at the obelisk. "They were an ancient species, far more advanced than anything we've ever seen. They created the obelisk as a means to bring peace to the galaxy. But it didn't work. It tore them apart. It caused the destruction of their entire civilization." Zara's face grew pale as she listened. "So the obelisk, it's a weapon?" Elijah shook his head. "No, not exactly. It's not a weapon. It's a tool, a device designed to bring unity, but something went wrong. They tried to unite too many races, too many worlds, and in the end they couldn't control it. It tore them apart." The silence that followed was heavy. The weight of what Elijah had just revealed hung in the air like a dark cloud. If the obelisk really was what he believed it to be, it wasn't just a relic. It was a power beyond their comprehension. A power that could either save or destroy everything. They both turned toward the obelisk, which now seemed to hum with a deep, resonant energy. The air was thick, charged with an electric intensity that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. "Elijah," Zara said quietly, her voice filled with a new sense of urgency. "We need to leave. We can't stay here. Whatever this thing is, we don't understand it. And the longer we stay, the more dangerous it gets." Elijah stared at the obelisk, his expression torn. Zara was right. The obelisk had already started to reveal its power and its dangers, but something in him wouldn't let go. He had to know more. They couldn't leave yet. "Not when they were this close." "We can't leave yet, Zara," he said softly. "We're on the edge of something huge. I can feel it. If we leave now, we might never get another chance to understand it." Zara opened her mouth to argue, but the ground beneath their feet suddenly trembled. It was subtle at first, a vibration that could have been mistaken for a passing wind, but it grew stronger with each passing second. The obelisk's hum grew louder, more insistent, as if it were calling out to them. Before they could react, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the obelisk, blinding them both. The light consumed everything, the landscape, the ship, the sky. For a moment there was nothing but light, and then just as suddenly it vanished. When Elijah opened his eyes, everything had changed. The landscape was no longer the barren wasteland it had been. The air was alive with color, the sky filled with swirling patterns of light. The obelisk stood in the center, now glowing brightly, its surface pulsing with energy. But around it, something had shifted, something had awakened. And Elijah realized with a shock of clarity that the obelisk had done something far greater than he could have ever imagined. They weren't just on a new world. They were in a new reality. The reality around Elijah and Zara seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The air hummed with a strange, otherworldly energy, and the colors that filled the sky were unlike anything they had ever seen before. The purple haze that had once covered the planet was now gone, replaced by swirling streams of light, like liquid fire moving in all directions. It felt as though the very fabric of reality had shifted, and they were no longer standing on the same planet, in the same place. The obelisk stood at the center, more magnificent than before. It radiated a soft, steady glow, its surface shimmering as if alive. The symbols that had once been faint and cryptic were now vibrant, almost as though they were dancing in the air, forming shapes and patterns that seemed to change the longer they looked at them. Elijah's heart raced. It was like something had opened, a door to an ancient world, one that he couldn't quite grasp yet, but was sure held untold secrets. "What happened?" Zara whispered, her voice shaky as she looked around. She stepped forward, her eyes wide, but her feet seemed rooted to the ground, unsure if it was safe to move any further. Elijah didn't know how to answer. He felt as though he was in a dream, one where nothing made sense and yet everything felt inevitable. There was no mistaking it now. The obelisk had done something powerful, something they weren't ready for, but they couldn't turn back. There was no turning back now. "The obelisk, it's not just a relic," Elijah said, his voice low, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. "It's a doorway, a gateway to something bigger, something far beyond us." Zara looked at him, her eyes narrowing in confusion. "A doorway, but to what? Where are we?" Elijah shook his head, feeling a strange pull in his chest as he stared at the glowing symbols. He didn't have the answers yet. He wasn't sure he ever would. But he could feel that they had just opened something, and whatever it was bigger than any artifact, any mystery they had ever uncovered. "We need to get back to the ship," Zara said urgently, her voice filled with concern. "This is dangerous. We don't know what's happening here. Whatever this is, it's beyond us." But Elijah didn't move. He couldn't. He felt as though he was being drawn toward the obelisk, as if the stone itself was calling to him. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a deep primal urge. He had to understand it to see it through. There was no other choice. "I can't leave," he said, almost to himself, as if the words were coming from somewhere deep within. "Not yet. There's something I need to understand." Zara's voice rose in frustration. "Elijah, this isn't a good idea. We don't even know what this is. What if—" "Elijah," came a voice from behind them, cutting her off. Zara and Elijah both turned around. The rest of the crew stood behind them, their faces filled with disbelief and fear. Lieutenant Zara's cousin, Jamal, looked the most disturbed, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. The others were clearly uneasy, their weapons still holstered, but their fingers twitching in a way that suggested they were ready to react if things got out of control. "You need to see this," Jamal said, his voice tense. Elijah and Zara exchanged a glance before walking over to the crew, who had gathered around a small device they had set up earlier. The small handheld scanner was now blinking with red lights, indicating something they couldn't interpret. "What is it?" Elijah asked, his voice filled with the same curiosity that had driven him to touch the obelisk in the first place. Jamal looked at him, a mixture of shock and disbelief in his eyes. It's sending out a signal to other ships, other places. The obelisk, it's calling to something." Zara frowned. "What kind of signal?" "It's not just a distress signal," Jamal replied. "It's a beacon, a signal that's been dormant for centuries, and now it's active." Elijah's heart skipped a beat. "How far does it reach?" Jamal hesitated, tapping a few buttons on the device. The scanner beeped and the screen flashed with a series of numbers and coordinates. "Far," Jamal said softly. "Too far, it's spreading across systems. Multiple sectors are picking it up. It's a distress call to anyone who might still be out there." Elijah's mind raced. A beacon, a call. The obelisk wasn't just some ancient artifact. It was a signal, a message that had been dormant for millennia, waiting for someone to activate it. But who or what had built it, and why had it been abandoned? And more importantly, who or what would answer its call? "We need to find out who's listening," Elijah said, a determined edge in his voice. We need to understand who or what built this. Zara looked at him, her expression conflicted. And if it's something we're not ready for, we'll deal with it, Elijah said firmly. But we need answers. We can't leave now, not after everything we've seen. Reluctantly, Zara nodded, though she still looked uneasy. Okay, but we need to keep our guard up. Whatever happens next, we need to be prepared. They turned back to the obelisk. The signal was growing stronger now, its hum reverberating through the ground beneath their feet. The symbols on the obelisk seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and Elijah could swear that the energy in the air was becoming more intense with every passing moment. The obelisk was more than just an artifact, it was alive and it was reaching out. Suddenly the ground beneath them trembled. The vibrations were subtle at first, just a slight shift in the earth beneath their feet. But within seconds the tremors grew stronger, more violent. The sky, which had been filled with swirling colors, now darkened as if some unseen force was pulling the atmosphere into itself. A low rumble echoed through the air, followed by a sharp crack like the sound of thunder splitting the earth in two. Elijah! Zara shouted. We need to get to the ship, now! But it was too late. The obelisk suddenly flared with a blinding light, shooting a beam of energy into the sky. The beam reached high above, piercing through the atmosphere and out into space. For a moment, the entire planet seemed to tremble with the force of it. Elijah felt the energy flood through him once more, stronger this time, as if the obelisk was connecting with something deep within him. It wasn't just a vision this time. It was as though the obelisk was speaking directly to him, its voice reverberating in his mind. He staggered back, his mind racing. He could hear it now, clearer than ever, whispers. Whispers of the ancient race that had built the obelisk, their voices echoing through the ages. The sound was deafening, yet strangely calming. He understood now. The obelisk had been built as a way to connect with the lost civilizations of the galaxy, to unite them in a shared purpose. But something had gone wrong. The obelisk's signal was too powerful, too dangerous, and it had torn the civilizations apart instead of bringing them together. Elijah, Zara shouted, grabbing him by the arm. We have to move. But Elijah couldn't move. He couldn't tear himself away from the beam of energy that seemed to call to him, urging him to reach out, to make contact with whatever was on the other side. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the beam of light stopped. The ground shook one last time, then fell silent. The strange colors in the sky began to fade, leaving the planet eerily still. The obelisk had fallen silent again, but this time the silence felt different. It wasn't the stillness of a forgotten relic. It was the quiet after a storm, the calm before something even greater was about to unfold. Elijah stood there, his breath shallow, his mind still racing. He had made contact with the obelisk, and he could feel it now. Something was coming. Something far beyond their understanding. And they weren't alone anymore. The silence that followed the sudden burst of energy from the obelisk was unsettling. The planet, which had once hummed with strange energy, now seemed eerily still. Elijah stood motionless, staring at the obelisk as it flickered with a faint glow. The beam that had shot into the sky had disappeared, but the air still felt charged, as if something deep within the planet had been awakened. Zara stood beside him, her hand on her blaster, her eyes scanning the horizon, expecting something to emerge at any moment. The crew had backed away, forming a loose circle around the obelisk, but their faces were filled with unease, as if they sensed that whatever they had just witnessed was only the beginning. What just happened? Jamal asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes were wide, reflecting the shock they all felt. Elijah didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing, trying to process the overwhelming energy that had flooded his senses. The obelisk had reached out to him, and for a brief moment it felt as if the whole galaxy had opened up to him. He had seen flashes, images of worlds, of civilizations long lost, of strange and ancient beings. And then there had been the whispers, voices from the past, echoing through his mind, urging him to understand. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his mind. I don't know, he said finally, his voice distant. But I think we've just unlocked something. And it's not just a relic, it's alive in a way I can't explain. Zara's eyes narrowed as she turned to look at the obelisk again. Alive, you mean like a machine? Elijah didn't know how to explain it. It wasn't a machine, not exactly. It wasn't a weapon either. It was something beyond anything he had ever encountered. A tool of sorts, but one with a purpose far greater than anyone could imagine. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little they truly understood. This wasn't just about uncovering ancient technology. This was about something that had been waiting for them to find it. "We need to get back to the ship," Zara said firmly. "We've seen enough for now. Whatever that was, we don't understand it. It's too dangerous to stay here any longer." Elijah's gaze flickered to her, his brow furrowed in conflict. He could feel her concern, and he understood it. But there was something inside him that couldn't let go. He had touched the obelisk, and now it had left its mark on him. He couldn't walk away, not when they were so close to something monumental. "I can't leave yet," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Not until we know what that signal was, not until we understand who's responding." Zara hesitated, her eyes flicking from Elijah to the obelisk and then back to the crew. She knew the risks. She had been with him on countless missions, seen him chase down leads that turned out to be dead ends. But this was different. They weren't just uncovering an old artifact. They were touching something that had been untouched for centuries, and it was reacting to them in ways they couldn't begin to understand. "Elijah," she said softly, her voice betraying her concern. "This is too much. We don't even know what that signal means. What if it's not a signal we want to hear?" The words hung in the air, heavy with uncertainty. Elijah's mind raced, but his decision was made. There was no turning back. They had come this far, and there was no way he was going to stop now. "We have to find out," he said firmly. "I can't let this go. We need to know who or what is out there and what this obelisk is really for." Zara opened her mouth to argue, but stopped herself. She could see the determination in his eyes. It was the same look he always had when he was about to dive headfirst into the unknown. She knew he wouldn't back down. "Fine," she said finally, her voice heavy with reluctance. "But we're staying alert. And we're going to get out of here as soon as we can. No more delays." The crew exchanged nervous glances but nodded, falling into line behind Elijah and Zara. They had always trusted their captain, even when his curiosity put them in dangerous situations. But this time felt different. This time, they were no longer just exploring an ancient ruin. They were standing on the edge of something that could change the entire galaxy. The air around the obelisk still hummed with energy, though the beam of light had vanished. The ground beneath their feet felt oddly warm, as if the obelisk was somehow alive, feeding off the energy of the planet itself. Elijah stepped forward cautiously, his eyes fixed on the obelisk's surface. The symbols were still glowing, but now they seemed to shimmer in patterns, forming shapes and figures that danced in the air before vanishing as quickly as they appeared. As he reached out to touch the obelisk again, a low hum filled the air. This time it wasn't just the obelisk responding to him, it was something else, something far deeper. The ground beneath their feet shook again, but this time it was different. The vibrations weren't just a random tremor. They were rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, pulsing with an energy that resonated deep within Elijah's chest. "Elijah," Zara said, her voice urgent. "Get away from it now." But Elijah didn't move. He couldn't. Something had shifted, something in the very core of his being. He could feel the obelisk reaching out to him, pulling him closer, urging him to understand. His fingers brushed against the smooth surface, and for a moment everything stopped. The vibrations ceased. The hum faded. Then a voice echoed in his mind. "You are the one." The words were clear, sharp, and direct, yet they felt like a whisper in the depths of his consciousness. He stumbled back, his hand flying to his head as a wave of dizziness washed over him. He tried to shake it off, but the words kept echoing in his mind. "You are the one." The voice wasn't human, it wasn't even alien, it was ancient, a voice that had been waiting for centuries, perhaps millennia, for someone to awaken it. "Elijah!" Zara shouted, pulling him away from the obelisk. She gripped his arm tightly, her face pale with fear. "What did it say to you? Are you okay?" Elijah blinked, trying to clear his head. His heart raced, his breath shallow. He looked around at the crew, who were now staring at him with wide eyes. It was clear they had seen something change in him. They had seen him connect with the obelisk in a way none of them could understand. I don't know," Elijah said, his voice shaky. It spoke to me, the obelisk. It said, 'You are the one.'" The crew exchanged uncertain looks. Jamal stepped forward, his face drawn with concern. "You're sure the obelisk, it talked to you?" "I heard it," Elijah replied, still trying to process the strange, almost haunting feeling that had come over him. "It's not just a device, it's something more, something." "Alive," Zara's grip on his arm tightened. This is getting out of hand, Elijah. We need to leave, now. Elijah wanted to agree. He knew they were in danger. The obelisk was not just an ancient artifact. It was a sentient being, one that had been dormant for far too long. But there was something else inside him now, something deep and ancient that urged him to stay, to keep searching for answers. He couldn't explain it, but the connection he felt with the obelisk was undeniable. "We can't leave," Elijah said, his voice more forceful now. "Not yet. I have to understand. I have to know what it wants." Zara's face darkened, but she didn't argue. She knew Elijah too well. When he set his mind to something, there was no stopping him. She just hoped they wouldn't regret it. They all stood in silence, watching the obelisk as it continued to pulse with an eerie glow. The ground beneath them was still warm, the energy in the air thick and heavy. They didn't know what was coming next, but they could all feel it. The galaxy was changing, and they were standing right in the middle of it. The air around them seemed to thicken, charged with an energy that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Elijah stood at the edge of the obelisk, his hand still shaking from the strange connection he had felt moments ago. The words, the voice, still echoed in his mind. "You are the one." The message was as clear as if it had been spoken aloud, yet the sound of it reverberated through his entire being, vibrating in his bones. Zara stood a few steps away, her face pale, her brow furrowed with concern. The rest of the crew huddled behind her, looking to their captain, waiting for direction. The planet, which had once been silent and lifeless, now seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if waiting for the next move. Every few seconds the obelisk would flash with a faint light, the strange symbols on its surface shifting in patterns too fast to follow. "Elijah," Zara said quietly, her voice betraying her unease. "This is too much. We have no idea what's happening here." "We don't know what that voice was. It could be dangerous." Elijah didn't respond immediately. He was too caught up in the strange pull that the obelisk exerted on him. There was something undeniable about the connection he felt, something that went beyond mere curiosity. The voice hadn't just spoken to him, it had chosen him. And with that choice, he had been given a responsibility. He didn't know what the consequences would be, but he knew he couldn't walk away. "I can't leave," he said, his voice firm but soft, as though he was speaking more to himself than to anyone else. "We've come this far, Zara. There's something bigger here than we realize. We need to understand it." Zara's lips pressed together, frustration clearly building. She glanced back at the crew, then back at Elijah. She knew him too well. When he was like this, nothing could stop him. But she also knew that they were standing on the edge of something dangerous. "We can't just stand here forever," she said, her tone a mixture of worry and determination. "Whatever that voice was, whatever this obelisk is, it's changing the planet. The atmosphere, the landscape, it's all shifting. We don't know what's coming next. We have to get to the ship and—" "Elijah," Jamal interrupted. His voice was uncharacteristically tense, and Elijah turned to look at him. Jamal's face was pale, his eyes wide. "You need to see this." Elijah's heart skipped a beat. He followed Jamal's gaze, and his breath caught in his throat. The ground beneath them was vibrating again, but this time it was different. The vibrations were more intense, more focused. They were coming from the obelisk itself. Without warning, a powerful shockwave surged through the ground. The air trembled, and a deep rumble echoed from the obelisk, as if it were awakening from a long, deep slumber. Elijah staggered, his feet unsteady as the shockwave reverberated through him, shaking him to the core. It wasn't just the planet that was reacting. The entire atmosphere seemed to respond, swirling with energy, as though it too was being pulled into the obelisk's wake. Zara grabbed Elijah's arm, steadying him. "We need to go now," she said urgently. "This isn't just an artifact anymore, it's something else, it's too powerful." But Elijah didn't move. He stood there, his eyes locked on the obelisk. The hum of its energy had grown louder, almost deafening now. He could feel the vibrations in his chest, in his very bones. The obelisk was speaking to him again, but this time it wasn't just words. It was a flood of images, a torrent of visions crashing into his mind. He saw distant stars, long-forgotten civilizations, and ships that could travel across galaxies. He saw the obelisk as it had once been, alive, functioning as a hub of unity for countless races across the universe. And then he saw the destruction, how the obelisk's power had been misused, how it had torn civilizations apart, unraveling the delicate balance of peace it was meant to create. The images shifted again. He saw the Obelisk's creators, a race of beings so advanced that their very thoughts seemed to shape the fabric of the universe. They had built the Obelisk with the hope of uniting the galaxy to bring peace to a fractured universe. But something had gone wrong. The Obelisk's power was too great. The races that had once sought unity through it had been destroyed in a catastrophic war. "You are the one," the voice echoed again, louder now, clearer. "The one to end the cycle, the one to make the choice." Elijah's heart raced as the weight of the voice's words settled on him. It was as if the Obelisk had chosen him, as if it had reached into the depths of his soul and found the one person who could stop the madness, the destruction, the endless cycle of conflict. But what choice was he being asked to make, and was he ready to bear the responsibility of such power? "Captain," Jamal said again, his voice more insistent. "We have to move, something's happening." Elijah snapped back to reality, his mind reeling from the visions. He looked around him, and for the first time he realized how much had changed. The planet had transformed. Where there had once been a barren wasteland, there were now green fields stretching across the horizon, and the sky was filled with swirling clouds of energy, as if the planet itself was coming alive in response to the Obelisk's power. But there was no time to marvel at the transformation. The ground beneath them began to crack, large fissures appearing as the Obelisk pulsed with energy. The entire landscape was shifting, warping as the Obelisk's influence spread. "Elijah, now," Zara shouted, her grip tightening on his arm. "We have to go." But Elijah stood still, staring at the Obelisk. He felt something stir deep within him, a call he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the Obelisk speaking now. It was something more, something ancient. Something that had been waiting for him. He took a step forward, his feet moving of their own accord. The rest of the crew called after him, but Elijah was beyond hearing them. The Obelisk had chosen him, and now he had to make the choice. The ground trembled again, and this time it was accompanied by a deafening roar. The Obelisk's light flared, blinding in its intensity. Elijah raised his hand, feeling the energy in the air surge through him. The whispers, the visions, the voices, all of it surged together in a single moment of clarity. He understood now. The Obelisk was not a weapon. It was not a tool of peace nor a device of destruction. It was a test of who they were, of who he was. The power it offered could be used for unity, for peace, or it could tear the galaxy apart just as it had done to those who came before, and the choice was his. The voice came again, as if it had been waiting for him to realize. "You are the one, choose." Elijah closed his eyes, his mind racing with the weight of the decision. Could he wield such power? Could he unite the galaxy, or would he risk repeating the same mistakes that had led to the downfall of countless civilizations? He opened his eyes and looked at the crew. They stood behind him, waiting for him to make the call. They trusted him even now when the stakes were higher than ever. In that moment, Elijah knew what he had to do. He had to make the choice, for them, for the galaxy, and for himself. The Obelisk had given him the power, but it was up to him to decide how it would be used. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, placing his hand on the Obelisk once more. The energy surged through him, flooding his mind with clarity. The choice was his. He would bring unity, not destruction. He would end the cycle of war. He would use the Obelisk's power to heal the galaxy, to create peace where there had once been chaos. As the Obelisk's energy enveloped him, Elijah felt the weight of his decision settle on him like a mantle. The galaxy was watching. The cycle had to end. And with that, the Obelisk's light flared brighter than ever before.